Thank you everyone for coming to the first Research Week session of the week. We're always very excited during Research Week. I can hardly contain myself, as always. Biggest week of the year, and we've got some great speakers and great sessions. So we're really pleased today. But first I'll start with an acknowledgement of country, and haven't they turned on a beautiful day for us today? The blue skies and sunshine. Of course, we're on Dja Dja Wurrung country, and we'll pay our respects to the Djara people and thank them for looking after our lands and waters on which we work and play every day. And we'll pay our respects to elders past and present. I'd like to now introduce Beck McLean, who is the Alfred Trial Hub Communications Manager. Beck's an experienced journalist, media manager and communications specialist with almost 2 decades of experience working in the hospital and healthcare industry, not-for-profit, corporate sector and journalism in New Zealand, Australia, the Middle East and London. Well travelled. She's a former health reporter who worked for New Zealand's largest daily newspaper and has held senior communications positions at 2 major hospitals in New Zealand and Australia. She's also managed a major education program on behalf of the British government in Muscat, Oman, which I'd love to chat more about after this, Beck. For the last 4 years, she's led the clinical trial communications program for the federal government in their pilot trial hub, as well as Alfred Health's research and clinical trials communications. And we're so rapt that Beck can come and talk to us today about the value of communications in clinical trials.
Thank you, Beck. Thanks for the welcome. Thanks for having me. Communications is something that's always an afterthought and it's always forgotten, and I'm very passionate about getting it front of mind to as many people as possible. So this is a really great opportunity, even if it starts the conversation about what needs to happen in this space. So as Ange said, I've been with the Trial Hub program now since it was nothing but a piece of paper. I started with Anne Willett and we built it from the ground up in a pretty dingy office in the middle of ground floor in the Alfred. And I had worked in hospital comms roles prior and hospitals that had clinical trials. I'd never touched a single clinical trial story ever in my whole career. I knew the hospitals did clinical trials. We were never instructed to do anything around it. We were almost told, don't touch it. It's this nice thing the hospital has, but we don't go there. We leave it to the university to do clinical trial comms. So it was a steep learning curve for me, trying to understand this new world. Admittedly, first 3 months, I thought I was never going to grasp this concept. You think healthcare has acronyms, clinical trials, that's on steroids. But I like a challenge, and I was like, I've got to break through this because someone has to break through and get this understood more widely. So the first couple of months was really trying to get my head around the landscape. How to talk about clinical trials and just starting to break the surface. So I'm just going to backtrack a little bit on what the Trial Hub program is, and we're coming up to the end of the pilot in June next year. We want to be refunded, so keep talking about us. Now I've got this slide up, local access to tomorrow's treatment today, and that's our new tagline. And that has come from one of your patients. So from 4 years of chatting directly with clinical trial patients, I've managed to almost rewrite the language around clinical trials. So if I go, I can do it myself. The next slide. It's not working on this. Do I need to point it somewhere to move it?
With that.
Aha.
There he is, John Robson. He says it right there. So John Robson was put in touch with me a couple of years ago by your team. As Trial Hub started to pilot, we developed an ambassador program. So this is where real clinical trial patients have been going out into their local community to talk about clinical trials in their own words and from their own story. Very different to the consumer role. So I don't have time to go into that program in depth. I do have an application in with ACTA to hopefully do a presentation on that this year, and I'll be taking John and the Gippsland ambassador with me to do that presentation, so fingers crossed. But John has been instrumental in helping me get into that frame of mind of the country, you know, rural person, and really helped me along with the other ambassadors to flip the language around on its head and really start to resonate a lot more with regional and rural Victorians. The idea, we had been chatting as a group that all the videos and information that were currently out were always filmed in a hospital. It was a sit-down interview. It was always a clinician, and we were kind of chatting back and forth this year. This is the first time the 7 hospitals Trial Hub has been working with, has finally started doing clinical trial communication. So we thought this is the great year to come out with something joint. And a wrong turn to one of our regional sites led me to actually hang up from another ambassador to put my GPS on to get directions. And that's when the voice of Karen Jacobson, who was a real person, and the real voice of Siri popped up on my phone, and I went, that's it, that's the video. It shows geographic, it brings in the geographic element, but she's the fountain of knowledge as well. Let's flip it on its head and get her to ask the questions. So I phoned all these guys and said, what do you think? Great, let's do it. Let's do a road trip in Victoria. It was really important to take these guys out of the hospital setting, get as many outdoor locations as possible to break that instant fear of seeing a hospital in the background and have that relatable. Right down to John wearing a hat was really important. He's a melanoma patient, so we had to think of all the details as well. And this is what came about. If I'll just show it, and this was intended to be used as a patient resource, but also there was a headline probably a month prior from a Metro paper that said regional rural patients still don't have access to clinical trials. And I went, enough, we need to debunk that. And we also need to remove terms like guinea pig, lab rat completely off the internet. So even when people have good intentions of myth busting by using those terms, you're still putting them back into the internet. So that's why there's no use of that language. And we also wanted to highlight that you can establish a great career now outside of Melbourne. There's still a misunderstanding down in Melbourne. That is where the only place you can go to work in clinical trials and research. So that's the background of this video.
Hello, I'm Karen, the original Aussie voice of Siri in over 1 billion phones. Usually you're asking me the questions, but today it's my turn to ask some important questions about clinical trials. How do you explain a clinical trial without saying clinical trial?
To me, I would describe it as hopefully we are getting stock standard best treatment that will be available in 5 years today. So we are getting tomorrow's treatment today.
Clinical trials are just for testing new medications. True or false?
False. The myth is that clinical trials only test new medications. However, they are actually used to test multiple different interventions, such as diagnostic and surgical procedures, medical devices, preventative strategies, and overall improve the healthcare system.
Clinical trials can be a proactive way to manage your disease. True or false?
That's true. So clinical trials are an alternative pathway to access medications that could be considered absolute game changers in the future. They're often more personalised to either your type or stage of cancer and sometimes the molecular makeup itself.
Clinical trials aren't that important to the healthcare system. True or false?
False. Participation in clinical trials is crucial to our healthcare system. Every treatment available today was tried and approved through a clinical trial.
Clinical trials are available to everyone. True or false?
That's true. Clinical trials are available to everyone. As long as you meet the study criteria, you should consider a clinical trial.
Being on a clinical trial is a positive experience. True or false?
It is absolutely true. I have been on a number of clinical trials and I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. However, that time that I've spent down there has led me to build some fantastic relationships with the people in the medical fields. That support network has given me a fantastic positive mind frame.
Hospitals take on any clinical trial offered to them. True or false?
False. Every community is different and we consider the diseases that are most common in our community. We then look for clinical trials that address those diseases and we're looking for the maximum benefit for our patients.
You can't forge an interesting career in clinical trials outside of Melbourne. True or false?
False. Unfortunately, this is something I believed up until when I started my oncology training, but it's simply not true. We've been able to build capacity. This allowed me to pursue interest in research and clinical trials while staying in regional Victoria.
Regional patients are still missing out on clinical trials. True or false?
That's both true and false. Look, 20 to 30 years ago, there were very few options for country patients to go into clinical trials. Thanks to the investments and efforts of Trial Hub, there are now clinical trials available in places such as Gippsland, Bass Coast, Mildura, and Bendigo. There are more patients with different types of diseases and different types of cancers living in regional and outer metro areas who need to get access to clinical trials. More work needs to be done.
So after we released that video, it went pretty crazy. I think we
drinking warm water before bed balances blood sugar levels.
I think I had 3 or 4 other state government departments asking to use it. We had sponsors asking for it and sharing it. One particular sponsor had sent it to 2,000 staff globally. So it had some pretty big reach. And just for some context of who everyone is in that video, all of those staff have either been through a Trial Hub workforce upskilling program or their role has been funded by Trial Hub. Steve and John are ambassadors, and Mark Shackleton actually came up with the Trial Hub concept after seeing regional rural patients constantly missing out on trials. So he went to the federal government 6-7 years ago to say we need to do something about it. So they all have a connection to Trial Hub. So Trial Hub, who we are, federal government funded right now, 5-year pilot. We provide a base at the Alfred, which has 650 clinical trials across 20 diseases. It's Australia's largest clinical trial site. We provide expert hub and spoke style support to help regional and outer metro hospitals deliver clinical trials to their local communities. We have 6 hospitals as part of this pilot: Bendigo, Mildura Hospital, Latrobe Regional Hospital, Bass Coast Health, Northern Health, and Peninsula Health. And the reason for the 2 outer metro hospitals is still, for many of their patients, distance is still difficult into metro Melbourne. And our mission is that regional, rural and outer metro patients have local access to clinical trials. So next, backwards, back. So simply, this is the Trial Hub model. So I think we're a fairly unique program. We're a team of 7 and we all have specific programs we look after. I look after the communications program, which is basically helping hospitals with setting up communications infrastructure to help raise awareness of clinical trials. We have operation programs, teletrials, education, upskilling, governance and strategy. So we embed ourselves into the health service and work side by side as partnership. I call us colleagues. We're not telling you what to do at all. We come in, we listen, we learn. We're just here to amplify what you might already be doing. But 2 of our sites have never had a clinical trial research presence before. We assessed, we developed and Willett developed along with others, a capability tool, Australian first, to really to start with what does the hospital actually need and sort of give us a better idea of what are the gaps that we can help fill. We then, and this is where I've been for the last 4 years, providing support to as much as I can to the 7 hospitals. I call it the Alfred as well. Again, that's where we provide that colleague to colleague support. We then link and help identify suitable clinical trials as your capacity grows, and including teletrials. And then we also help raise clinical trial awareness in the community. So while we might be trying to help each hospital to do their own comms, from a trial hub perspective, I'm also pumping out stories to national media, state media, to industry, to sponsors, to government, whatever it may be. And so raising awareness of clinical trials, it's a global problem. Low awareness of clinical trials is a global problem. It's not unique to Australia. It's all over the world. It continues to be a problem. Hospitals, as I've said, just haven't had to prioritise clinical trial communications before the National Clinical Governance framework, but that's now changing. It is now having to become front of mind. And communication resources staff so limited at each hospital. Average at each hospital is about 1 to 2 communication staff. One of our hospitals, which is probably not that much, well, Peninsula Health has 1 communications person. So it's starting to change my thinking now as we near the end of the pilot, that maybe it's not as simple as expecting hospital comms teams to do the comms. Maybe it's a different approach, and that's what we're trying to work out at the moment. So what do we want to achieve if we implement good clinical trial comms into the hospital? We want it embedded and consistent, and it becomes business as usual. As I said prior, it was never front of mind when I worked in hospital comms teams, but you really want to get to that point where it's just something you do every day and you don't even think about it, and you constantly have something related to clinical trials coming out. We have a big role to play in generating inquiries and increasing participation numbers. What I can say as a result of John's involvement in that video, I have heard anecdotally from other hospitals that farmers have proactively contacted their hospital about a clinical trial because they can relate to him. So we can play a really exciting part in generating those inquiries and helping increase those participation numbers. I have another example of another hospital where they opened a clinical trial centre 3 years ago, about 40-50 k's from their main hospital. They have 12 trials open and not a single patient on them. Their community doesn't even know they have clinical trials available, and there's no presence of it on their website. So we have a big role to play to get this information out. We would have supported the recruitment of new clinical trial staff to the region. And this is the part that gets forgotten, I think, for a lot of comms, is that staff profiling and that profiling of the clinical trial sector is really important as well. And I have another great example of another hospital that was doing a lot of focusing of profiling of who their clinical trial staff and what the job prospects were to come and work at their hospital. And that's putting into the internet lots of stories about workforce opportunities at that particular hospital. Someone very experienced in Queensland chucked in a search. He wanted a sea change. He decided he wanted to go and work in regional Victoria. Had never lived in Victoria. Searched clinical trials, regional Victoria. This hospital popped up. He's now been there for a year. He moved. He applied for a job and got it. So it highlights the role we can play as well as in attracting staff to your region. And there's always, I keep saying as well, Melbourne people promote in Melbourne. People in Melbourne want to change, get them out working in the regions. We would have helped attract new trials to our hospital. So again, if we can clearly be communicating to sponsors, and again, another mechanism is setting up a dedicated newsletter to your sponsors about what's happening in your clinical trials, but also on your website, making sure you have your capabilities clear. So any sponsor coming to your website knows what you're capable of doing and proactively comes to you. So comms, again, we can help attract new trials to the hospital. We would have changed and refreshed the clinical trial language. It's really important you're speaking to your community in the language that resonates with them. And through all this, we've reached new communities and new audiences. You know, we want to start diversifying who's currently going on clinical trials. So we need to be mindful, we need to tailor our messaging for different audiences as well. So with that in mind, stopped again. I need to point it somewhere. You need to do it. So the risks of not prioritising communications in your clinical trials, you'll continue to have low recruitment. I'm still hearing a lot that word of mouth and sending emails to colleagues is still a big way clinicians are recruiting. So we need to now prioritise it so we can, you know, start increasing those recruitment numbers. There'll be continued misunderstanding of what clinical trials are and their importance, and I still find it so fascinating when I chat to you know, a brand new clinical trial participant, what their perception was of a clinical trial, you know, just prior. 100%, it's always, I'd never heard of it before, didn't know what it was, or I just thought it was these experimental things that line the pockets of pharmaceutical companies. So we need to keep hammering it home and continue to change that misconception. People will never understand if we don't promote clinical trials, people will never continue to understand the connection between new treatment and that it came from a clinical trial. You can almost watch that penny drop the moment you say, do you realise that Panadol you took was once a clinical trial? That everything has to be tested. It makes so much sense when they hear it in that moment, but it's never talked about when we talk about the breakthrough. So making sure that connection is there, and you know, that it does lead to those breakthroughs and new treatment. Lack of patients being able to self-advocate and self-refer. We want the patient to be able to make their own decision and be able to self-refer and self-advocate by being well-informed. There'll be no visibility of what's happening at the hospital. So you could be doing some cutting edge things, but your community won't know about it. You'll have no involvement in the patient involvement of the development of resources, the review process, the language. That's so important to have patients involved in the development of any resources you're creating around clinical trials. I've got to the point now where even if I'm just doing, you know, a simple brochure update, I'll quickly whiz it past a patient, or even an update to a website. I'll get it quickly reviewed. It doesn't have to be a technical, laborious process. it can be just as simple as a quick review. And I've just learnt so much from the participants themselves, just listening to them, because the other role that comms people take is they probably tell us a lot more than they would their clinician or their care team. And so we have a real opportunity here to hear the black and white information. You'll continue to have inconsistent messaging in language, so I highly recommend having your set suite of key messages in your language so you're constantly saying the same thing and not confusing anybody. And a very important one, I'm going to circle back to this at the end, you won't be able to adequately provide evidence for accreditation. As you know now, hospitals have now been audited on clinical trials, and what you're doing to help your patients understand clinical trials is also being assessed. So remember that, I will be coming back to that at the end. So how Trial Hub can support. So we have this has been 4 years in the making of going into hospitals and trying things and failing and stumbling, and I'm pretty confident this is the only way you're going to achieve success with your comms. It needs the full commitment of everyone involved in the clinical trial delivery, from the trial units, comms, research heads, executive, CEO, and consumers. Without everyone's commitment, you're going to keep hitting brick walls. So the first step, and I'm basing this on a hospital that has successfully done and executed this. The first step is in Trial Hub, if the help is welcomed, and I need full commitment from everyone, I can continue to provide intense support to the comms team. You know, I'm going into one hospital now a day a week until the end of Trial Hub to get that, to ensure, you know, we're leaving everyone in good stead if we're no longer funded from June. So it's the first step is making sure the communications team know the ins and outs of clinical trials, take my learnings, what I've learned along the way, how to speak the language. You know, there's a lot of fear to do anything in clinical trials in case they get it wrong, because there's also ethics to think of. I'm essentially coming in to help you take away that fear. Simultaneously, we're upskilling the clinical trial units on what comms is, why it's important to have it front of mind. And then we're working together on the process of how you guys want to work together, right down to the approval process, development of key messages, an activity plan, right down to, you know, even a commitment to a turnaround time if you want something approved. We then take that strategy together to executive and CEO. Simultaneously, it's reviewed by a consumer advisory to check we're on the right track. If that is all successful and signed off, this one's an important learning that I've learned. Don't go to community just yet. Make sure your workforce across the board know what clinical trials are. Make sure they know what's happening in clinical trials at your hospital. And I bring it back to this example I learned in year one. We did a big launch about clinical trials are coming to this region, and you're going to have all these cancer clinical trials. We had 250 people come to this event. That was very misleading. None of the hospital staff were invited to this event. It was an oversight on all of our part. We held this community event and it was full of people who felt let down because these were still 2-3 years away, these trials from opening. And then also the workforce didn't know anything about clinical trials. So we had to rein it back and go, let's just leave community for a little bit. Let's make sure, because the workforce is a communication channel as well. Their word of mouth is just as important. You don't want, they can refer patients into trials as well. And the other great thing that's been happening in other hospitals is staff have been moving from different parts of the hospital to go and work in clinical trials because they've found out what truly happens in that world. So I highly recommend focusing on that internal work first before community. And then when you feel like they're behind you, you've got this army of people ready to help you to promote clinical trials, then go to community. But again, don't overpromise and under-deliver. Keep it accurate with what you're letting community know. It's just continue to get messages out that help them understand what clinical trials are. Simultaneously, reach out to, proactively reaching out to sponsors at the same time, and government as well. You want ongoing government support, so keep them up to date with your successes, but your continued gaps as well. So in our strategy, we break those down by audience and the messages you want those stakeholders to know about your clinical trials. If we get all that done, this is what we can achieve together. We can do campaigns, videos, get your clinical trial webpage meeting accreditation standard. You can set up a GP newsletter, letting GPs know what you need to, might want to raise awareness to them of what trials are, but also what you've got available. We can do patient-led resources and language together, internal and community events, media, and the ambassador program. But again, as long as everyone's on board, this is what you can be achieving together. Oh, I think I just marked that up. So what can we do now? So there's no expectation that you're going to have, this all perfect tomorrow, not even next year, not even the next year. This is going to take time. We're only scratching the surface right now. But there's a couple of things you can be doing now. So you do have the TeleTrial brochure available to you that was patient-led. Trial Hub led that, we led that process to develop that brochure with actual clinical trial participants. They wrote the language, they chose the colours, they chose the images, they chose everything. I just kept my mouth shut and let them run with it. So highly recommend getting that up on your website and having that in patient waiting areas, quick fix. I have a First Nations clinical trial brochure coming. It's currently in production. Now, I say this has been a 12-month consultation. It's really been 4 years. So I've been out in regional Victoria now for 4 years, getting to know the different communities. And I keep getting pressure about doing a First Nations brochure, but why would we do that when we hadn't touched general community yet? But also most of the hospitals we work with didn't have clinical trials yet. So we needed something to offer. So about 12 months ago, it felt like the right time, and it's actually been a pretty easy process. I've been welcomed in pretty easily into First Nations communities across Victoria. And I've actually reached out to a couple of Indigenous clinical trial staff up in Far North Queensland, Northern Territory as well. And we completed the language that's going to go into that brochure about 2-3 weeks ago. And we have engaged a Bendigo Indigenous artist, actually, who is developing some bespoke artwork that will resonate with the 7 communities Trial Hub is in. And he's creating a unique story behind the artwork, and he's also designing that brochure, and he's also going to take it out to community for consultation as well. So that brochure will be only available to the 7 sites who are part of the Trial Hub program because we have tested the language in those communities. So my takeaway to other people will be, you can't just roll it out into other states. Sorry, you need to go and do it, do the same process in your state. So he's working on that at the moment, and that should be ready by the end of the year, maybe early next year. And that will be provided to you guys for your website and for patient waiting rooms as well. So the overwhelming response I've had is the clinical trial model suits First Nations perfectly. We just needed to get the benefits across to them, and some other little tidbits that I discovered. Just get rid of the word research out of it. There's too much historical harm, and remove the word clinical. Just go with trial. Just stick with trial. We've got an acknowledgement on the opening of the brochure that acknowledges the harm of research that has caused First Nations people in the past as well. But the brochure is really about, is very positive about the benefits a clinical trial will have on your health. We wanted to remove that stigma of we're going to take from you. No, this is about giving to you and helping you be proactive in managing your health. So I look forward to sharing that with you, and early next year I'll be doing a special launch with all a full session on the consultation process, the learnings and the final outcome. I would simplify your website back. There seems to be a mixture of internal and external content. So really prioritize what the external content needs to be. And I always say it's patients. Upload the teletrial brochure and really leverage that Cancer Council, those Cancer Council resources. Upload the patient FAQ. We have all of that stuff. Plenty of examples of what others have done with their website. They're all different, but you know, if you take elements from different ones, then you can build a really simple, user-friendly one. I think the website as well, having a really clear and dedicated spot for sponsors around what your capabilities are, what you have here. So it's very, if you happen to have a sponsor stumble across your site, they know what type of trials you might be able to do here quite quickly. And TrialHub has a newsletter that goes out directly to sponsors once a month, and we're always encouraging them to go to your websites, and that has around 1,200 people on that list. So we're always trying to amplify what you guys are doing here. So if they can clearly spot that, then that takes away any ambiguity. Encourage you setting up a dedicated newsletter to GPs. Another hospital of ours has done that successfully. So again, happy to share the learnings. And that's another point I want to raise is the central hub, like happy to share what's worked well in other sites, what hasn't, and take the best, let's take the best bits and make a really solid program. Utilise social media for raising awareness. Now, this is a problem across every site, including the Alfred. It's not being used as to its full potential to raise awareness. There's also huge potential to use the paid function to promote your clinical trials in general. But again, there's a lot of fear about doing the wrong thing, because there are some ethical things you need to be aware of before you do certain things on social media. But it's not as scary as I thought, and it's actually quite straightforward. So I'm currently developing a guide with lawyers and ethics to help comms teams with the do's and don'ts around how you can use social media and the paid function to bring more awareness to your clinical trials. So what I'd love one day from Bendigo Health is maybe just a paid post ticking away in the background with John, with his line, I'm getting tomorrow's treatment today. Explore all of our clinical trials, click here. and you're taken to all of your open clinical trials. It's just quietly ticking away in the background on paid social media, reaching your community that way. So there's a lot of potential in that space. You can establish an ambassador program. I've pretty much finished writing up the pilot and the framework and the how-to guide of how to run an ambassador program. So again, if there's that commitment to take it on board, that's ready to go should you wish. And this one's really important. Establish KPIs and develop a recording log. So, you know, set what you want to achieve with comms each month and have it agreed amongst everyone, but record the moment you do it, record your hits, your media reach, whatever it is, because trust me, in a couple of years' time, when those accreditors come back, you'll be so grateful it's there. So that's a little segue to what does the say, when do they come back, Ash? 3-4 years?
3 years.
3 years. I would love for you to be able to proactively offer your assessor, Alex, no pressure, an interview with someone from your communications team. So where I was going with this is we've had one of our sites have this happen 2 weeks ago. The assessor went and surprised the comms team and asked what their understanding was of clinical trials. How do they explain them? And what are they doing to proactively promote clinical trials and understanding to their community? Thankfully, and it's a good reminder, they had about a year and a half ago chosen to have one of their comms team focus a day a week on their clinical trial comms. So he has been maintaining their website, pushing stuff out on social media. Sometimes he even shares the same post twice. I haven't seen that before, but you know, whatever gets the message out. He's sending out the GP newsletter. He's always thinking of ways to reach new audiences. But he was set up with that strategy in the first place that was signed off, so he could hit the ground running, and Trial Hub has supported with getting their website into a good place as well. And he also had a year and a half, 2 years of a log where he could go back and show the assessor everything that he had done, right down to the reach of each post, website hits, you know, attendance at community events. So it took the pressure off the clinical trial unit and research team, who had actually got themselves ready to talk to this, but now looking back, there was going to be a lot missed. It took all that pressure off them and made comms part of the process. And the assessors had asked for half an hour. They ended up wanting an hour and a half. So I think this is something you should strive for and be aware of, that this, we sort of said a year or two ago, this may happen, that's happened. So I think this is where each hospital that's bringing in, making sure comms is part of that accreditation process and is embedded and can articulate clearly what clinical trials are is where you want to get to for the next accreditation. So that is my talk for this part of the session. Hopefully that gives you a bit more of an overview and some insight, and there's still a lot of challenges there, and like I said, we are now starting to think what's the longer term solution around resourcing, but we can still make some positive steps at the moment. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Kate. I wrote down, so I wouldn't forget.
I really liked the comment on the internal workforce, because I think an added layer, again, when you're going regionally, is that internal workforce are also consumers of the hospital as well. And so, you know, it's about getting their possibilities of their family to be involved in the clinical trials, or their friends, or but I suppose on the flip side of that is like, yeah, what are some ways to really kind of give them disseminate that information and kind of get them on side, when I feel like, you know, reaching out at the moment, there's still this hangover from COVID, and they, you know, everyone's a bit like, I've already got too much on my plate. I can't possibly squeeze in another thing type thing. So I just, how do you go about really engaging them?
It's more about your internal communications. I assume you've got an intranet, start internal.
Yeah.
So I think rather than going to staff when you want them to do something, it's about just constantly having a presence internally. So really using that internal intranet. It doesn't have to be about, we've got this trial open, can you refer? Or we've got this event, can you come? It could be as simple as, did you know? Or did you know, breaking, you know, having little tidbits of information constantly on there, rather than being reactive, be proactive. So you're subtly increasing their knowledge of clinical trials. So did you know what a phase 1 trial is? It's X, Y, Z. Did you? So like with the general public, just assume no one knows anything about clinical trials. So just constantly having those little tidbits roll, you'll be surprised at how their knowledge will build up, and they don't even realize it as well. So for example, on the Alfred SharePoint on the homepage, I just have a little section in there that says everything about clinical trials, and I just constantly go in and update, you know, did you know this year we had 250, I don't know, phase 3 trials or whatever it is. Do you even know what a phase 3 trial is? Here it is. So just constantly having that raising of awareness information out, even in putting that into your newsletters. Staff also get most of their information from social media. So again, you don't have to differentiate that message between community and staff. Again, it's just that rather than jumping straight to that or ask of them, just subtly building up their knowledge through fun ways. And I keep saying a multimedia approach. Leverage all your channels that you've got, keep the message the same, under the guise that their awareness of what clinical trials are is pretty low. So even simple things, like don't assume anyone will know, always write your acronyms in full, and just, all your comms, just assume that they don't know what you're talking about. But again, it's the consistency though, always have it floating around across the different channels.
Would you recommend different messages back for the general workforce, and then, you know, engaging with the CEO, exec, sort of that team? Are there different strategies for comms around, you know, trying to promote and get their understanding and engagement more in the clinical trials space for that more senior level and execs compared to the workforce?
I always, I think the only way to get, as I said, get everything working is that endorsement from the CEO and the executive. I think using, this is why an ambassador program would be great. I think hearing directly from the patients themselves really helps that understanding. with the messaging as well, and this is why the clinical trial teams and the comms need to get on the same page in the first instance, is the language has even changed around, you know, clinical trials were, you know, the misunderstanding was it was something someone does as a last ditch, you know, at the end of the line. I'll do it to give back to research, but we've now changed the messaging that it can be potentially life-saving. John now talks about he's been given the gift of the time, more time he didn't think he had, and that's pretty common among the cancer patients. But also one of the most important ones is it's actually quality life improving as well, and that's the message that seems to get missed all the time. And we have, admittedly, Trial have been completely focused on cancer. That's what we were funded to do. But then that doesn't give the full picture. So I think when you're speaking to anyone, give them the full picture of what clinical trials mean to patients. So keep bringing in your examples, build a bank of examples. So again, I've been fortunate to probably speak to about 40 participants in the last couple of years. Another one that stands out for me is that you probably wouldn't think of, is a young woman down in Warrnambool who had severe eczema to the point where she was just too embarrassed to leave the house. She stopped working. She lost her confidence going out. Her GP dermatologist just didn't know what to do. Through some promotion at the Alfred through paid through Facebook, there was actually a trial she was eligible for at the Alfred, and she somehow came across this ad on her social media and applied and was eligible, and has now cleared up her eczema, has gone back to work, is studying, has got her confidence back. So I think for the executive CEO, it's really around ensuring, flipping it to what it means to the patient and their daily life. And that quality of life improving message gets missed all the time. And this is also what I'm trying to get comms teams to do. There's a misconception at one of the hospitals as well that we don't do anything until there's been an outcome, a successful outcome. But that's giving the wrong impression as well. And also it can take, that's not always the outcome. And that's why they probably only do clinical trial stories once every 2 years. You need to take people on that journey of all those, all the positives. And that's the biggest thing I've learned from all the patients is keep it positive, you know, and be realistic. Yes, it might have saved my life, but they're realistic. It might not be my cure. I've got one ambassador who's 10 years post-clinical trial, but he still recognises that he's not cured. And they all talk about that gift of time I've been given, the opportunity to become a dad. Didn't think I would get it. John, I just wanted to be a granddad. That was my goal. Now I've got 2 grandkids I live for. It's those stories. And yeah, the lady down in Warrnambool hadn't left her house for 2 years, is now back in society. So I think if you can constantly be storytelling and use those rather than the technical information about clinical trials, and you know, take all of that out of it and bring the humanize it, because that's been the biggest thing I've seen that has been missed in the last, prior to the last 4 years, is there was no humanizing of how we talk about clinical trials. Even another little tidbit, I've removed the word test from my language. How about you try a clinical trial? Not you will test. It's all these simple changes that are building up to improving that awareness of clinical trials. So if I were you guys, I would get that narrative really clear about talking about clinical trials and those from that patient perspective. Yeah. Because there's also this misunderstanding that clinical trial research is just about the researcher and their ego and what they want from it. So flip it around and just constantly talk to it from the patient's perspective.
Good tips. Any other questions? No, a wealth of experience in a very short amount of time, Beck. I know it's trying to fit all of those, the experience and the tips and tricks is always a challenge, but you've done it beautifully today, and I think we'll be following up on many of those tips that you've given us, and yeah, we'd really like to take our trials forward with you in the next iteration of Trial Hub as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Questions, just drop me a line. I'm pretty passionate about this space, and other states are now starting to reach out because and they've also forgotten about comms and are now just think I think I'm the only person in the country doing this type of work, and even I'm starting to get approached internationally. So it shows we're starting to shift a little bit to prioritising the comms space around it.
Very important thing to do. Okay, so thank you, and thank you everyone for attending this session.